Today, we're going to analyze a framework known as business physics. Now, this isn't your standard business advice. Instead, it's an examination of the fundamental principles that govern how value gets created, and more importantly, how money concentrates within any given system. So let's start with a rather provocative question. The common wisdom is that if you're useful, you'll be valuable. But this framework argues that this exact belief is often why so many ventures just fail to scale. The reason? It confuses the act of solving a simple task with the creation of real leverage. You see, the core misunderstanding, according to this model, is what you might call a fundamental physics error. It's about confusing personal skill with scalable leverage. One is the direct output of an individual's time and effort, the other is the output of an entire system. And they operate under completely different laws. Let's look at the comparison. Skill is linear. Its output is directly tied to an input of your time. It also decays. You have to constantly maintain it, and crucially, its job is to solve a task. Leverage, on the other hand, is built to be scalable. It's system-based, not time-based, and its true function is to capture a persistent human emotion. Okay, so if leverage is all about emotion, then we have to identify the constants in that equation. The foundation of this entire system is what the framework calls the biological substrate. These are the core human drives. Think of them as the unchangeable forces that have guided economic behavior for thousands of years, way before our modern markets ever existed. And here are those 8 drives. It's really important to see these not as just marketing tactics to be exploited, but as the deep underlying currents of the economy. Everything from our need for status to our avoidance of fear, our search for control, and even the need for moral relief, all significant economic activity can be traced back to one or more of these biological constants. What's interesting is that each drive really has a dual nature. The entry expression is that initial, often productive way it shows up. For status, it's about our relative positioning to others. For fear, it's loss aversion. But each of these has a shadow expression, which is sort of a failure state. That search for status can become an empty hedonic treadmill, and trying to avoid fear can lead to buying redundant, unnecessary systems. Understanding this duality is critical if you want to build a sustainable system. So this brings us to the origin of value. Within this framework, value isn't created by adding more features or being more useful. It's created by performing a very specific, measurable action on a person's state of mind, moving them from a state of chaos to a state of clarity. And this action has a name: complexity compression. It actually helps to think about this in physics terms. Entropy is a measure of disorder, of chaos. So a user who is confused or fearful is in what you'd call a high entropy state. The work that a system does to reduce that chaos and provide clarity, well, that's complexity compression. That is the actual mechanical process of creating value. So every valuable transaction really begins here with what is called the origin tension. The user is experiencing a state of high entropy, cognitive load, uncertainty, confusion, maybe even fear. This right here is the problem space. And the entire goal of a system is to move that user to a low entropy state. This is a state of clarity, a feeling of control, or an increase in their perceived status. The greater the reduction in entropy, the bigger the journey from chaos to clarity, the more value has been created. All right, so now we can synthesize these principles. We can take the biological drives and this process of complexity compression, and we can put them together into a single governing law that describes how and why money actually concentrates in a system. The equation itself has 3 parts. First, latency. You identify a latent but powerful human drive, one of the 8 we just talked about. Second, compressor. You build a system, often software, that reduces the user's entropy around that specific drive. The result of those 2 is the third part, leverage, an infinitely scalable mechanism for creating value. And this brings us to the prime law of money. What it states is that significant capital doesn't flow to the most useful tool, it flows to the most effective system for capturing a primitive drive, amplifying it digitally, and then monetizing the relief from the tension that drive creates, ideally at zero marginal cost. Now, I know this can all feel a bit abstract, so to make it clearer, let's apply it to a very concrete example. We can really see the difference between an approach based on utility and one based on leverage. Let's imagine you're building a simple mortgage calculator. The generic way, the utility way, is to build a tool that just solves a math problem. It calculates numbers. It's a commodity. But the business physics way is completely different.
You'd build a system that generates, say, a proprietary financial health score. It doesn't just solve a math problem, it provides the user with the feeling of control through certainty, and it gives them status by letting them benchmark themselves against their peers. You see? It targets the core drives.
And the outcome of targeting those drives? It's that the second system, the one built on leverage, can command a significant recurring fee. The value isn't in the calculation itself. It's in the compression of financial anxiety into a single, clear score that provides both control and status. That's what people will pay a premium for. This entire analysis really leads to a final and critical question. When you're evaluating any business, you have to ask, is it simply a tool that performs a task, or is it a system designed to reduce entropy around a core human drive? Because the distinction between those two, according to this framework, is the difference between a simple commodity and a truly scalable asset.